On this episode of This Week in Linux, we take a look at the latest Raspberry Pi. Linus has some comments on some performance issues with the recent Spectre mitigations. Canonical announced 10 years support for Ubuntu 18.04. We'll also be checking out a bunch of distro releases from Void Linux, Slax, deepin, Whonix, and even a beta from Red Hat. Later in the show, we'll cover some security news, as well as some awesome sales going on for Linux games right now. All that and much more coming up. I'm Michael Tunnell with TuxDigital, and this is your weekly source for Linux GNews. Before we get started, I just wanted to apologize for not doing the show last week. But unfortunately, I became ill. And I'm still sick, as you can probably tell with how my voice sounds. But I just wanted to make it clear that if I can do the show, I will. And this week, I can. So let's just jump into it. Up first in the show this week is the Raspberry Pi Foundation has announced a new Raspberry Pi, the Pi 3A+. This is a kind of, it's new, but it's not like a new powerful one they typically do, where they release a new one that's even more powerful. This is more like a hybrid between the Power and the smaller form factor, because there's like the Raspberry Pi Zero or the Zero W, which is a very small small board, and it doesn't have all the different features and stuff like that. It doesn't have like a full USB port and things like that. So it's and it also isn't as powerful for the RAM or the CPU. So this one is more like an in-between between the main Raspberry Pi and the Pi Zero. It's actually cheaper than the regular Raspberry Pi as well. It's a $25 Pi, and it has a 1.4 gigahertz quad core CPU. They've added the Video Core 4 GPU, and it has 512 megs of RAM. So it's actually quite powerful for the form factor and the super small compact size it is, while also having full USB support, or full USB port, and a full HDMI port. It also has Bluetooth and Wi-Fi built into it. So it's kind of like sort of a more powerful original version of the Pi. Like the original Raspberry Pi was similar to this, and it's kind of like that, but a much more powerful version. So that's pretty cool. And if you're interested, you can check it out. There's probably going to be, when the next release from Raspberry Pi is probably going to be like the Pi 4, because they've kind of said that this is the last one that they're going to do of this series. So I look forward to that as well. But this is a pretty good option for people who are looking for something really cheap. And they also did an update to the Raspbian OS, which is the Debian-based distribution that is made by the Foundation. And they also, they basically made it where it has a minimal install, which is really nice. And they added VLC. And the reason why that's of significance to note is because prior they didn't really have a media player available on the system. And now they do with VLC, but also they have custom updates and drivers for the Video Core GPU that the board is now using. So that's pretty cool. So if you'd like to find some more information about this one, you can find a link in the show notes. If you've ever been curious about doing some home automation, you should check out Home Assistant, which is an open source home automation project. And their latest version added support for TensorFlow, Wemo Humidifier, which might be useful for me as being sick at this point. Anyway, and also they've done fixed some bugs for various different services. If you haven't heard of it, they describe this project as open source home automation that puts local control and privacy first. Powered by a worldwide community of tinkerers and DIY enthusiasts, perfect to run on a Raspberry Pi or a local server. Now, this is actually really cool. I've talked to some people personally that are they're a part of the TuxDigital Telegram community, and they are actually using Home Assistant right now. And they gave me some tips about what they like about it and things like that. And through my research about the project, there's a ton of different support that it has, like tons of different devices and services, and they call them components. And they have over 1,200 components right now as of this recording. Those include IFT, or If This Then That service. Also, it supports Kodi, Plex, Amazon Echo, Wemo devices, Bluetooth. You can even do SMS support, like sending text messages, and like a ton more. And if you're interested in checking it out, there's also a video from the founder of the project at the Open Internet of Things Summit. He did a keynote there, and it was called the Automating Your Home with Home Assistant Python's answer to the Internet of Things. So you can find a link to the article for the latest version of the project, as well as the link to the keynote from the creator of Home Assistant in the show notes. We got some interesting comments from Linus Torvalds on the kernel mailing list recently about the STIBP patch, or also as known as the Single Threat Indirect Branch Predictors patch. And this is the reason he's talking about is because he's not happy with the performance the performance hit that's coming with it. Basically, it's in some cases limiting it by up to 50% performance, and obviously that's not a good thing. This was introduced recently in 4.20, as well as to relate to the cross hyperthread Spectre variant 2 protection. Basically, it's another meltdown Spectre problem that they're dealing with, because this is going to continue to happen, and unfortunately, it's a little worse than what was stated originally from like the worst case scenario that was first introduced when they announced the problem. Was like a 30-40% maximum performance hit, and that's actually exceeded that, and that's unfortunate. But on the mailing list, Linus said, when performance goes down by 50% on some loads, people need to ask themselves whether it was worth it or not. I don't think the code needs to be reverted, but the behavior of just unconditionally enabling STIBP needs to be reverted, because it was clearly way more expensive than people were told. And expensive in the sense of like processes and performance. And yes, I would have to agree that that's a ridiculous amount of issues to deal with. But they also said that there's a lot of discussion going on with the developers, and that there's currently a consensus to only enable this patch for specific processes that it affects the most, so as to not kill the full Linux performance across the entire system. And they've also backported these patches to 4.19.2. So if you are using 4.19, you might be affected if you did update to that version. But you still should use these, because it is an issue that's, if you're vulnerable to it and you are attacked by it, which is unlikely but still possible, it would not be very good. So it's kind of like a situation where it's not good, but it kind of needs to be done. And hopefully they'll be able to optimize and figure out a way to mitigate the mitigation, I guess. So if you'd like to learn more, or check out the link in the show notes for the message from Linus Torvalds about this topic, as well as I also put like a Whonix article that just talked about it as well, because that was a really interesting one too. At the OpenStack Summit in Berlin, Mark Shuttleworth announced that Ubuntu 18.04 LTS would be extended from the just 5 years to the now 10 years of support. According to Mark, in part, the reason is because of the very long time horizons in some industries like financial services, telecommunications, and others, but also from an IoT where manufacturing lines, for example, are being delayed that will be in production for at least a decade. So the idea of in adding extra time for it is just a great thing. You could kind of even say that it might be a little bit of a reference to like the what Red Hat does. So it could be in response to Red Hat doing like IBM buying Red Hat. But Ubuntu gets most of its money from server and cloud customers, so it does make sense that they would do that. And giving them extra 10 years, or giving them an extra 5 years for a total of 10, is really good, because that's actually what Red Hat does anyway by default. They give a 10-year support cycle. So it's really good that they're doing this, because it allows them to compete in that space as much up directly against Red Hat for long-term support. They also said that they're going to do a longer lifespan. They haven't really said exactly, but they said a longer lifespan for 16.04, so that the original stating for, or the original date for end of support for 16.04 was 2021. They say they're going to keep that one going. They haven't really said how long that will be yet, but whenever they do, I'll update you on that one. They also said that they're addressing the OpenStack promising to support versions from 2014 and going forward, but again, they haven't said how long the 14.04 would be maintained either. But he did say that what matters isn't day 2. What matters is day 1,500, which is actually less than 5 years. So, so anyway, it's really good to see that they're doing it, and it does show that they are making moves to remain competitive in that space as far as like the big enterprise push. So it is kind of interesting because of all the talks about the IPO and things like that. I think it'll be very fascinating to see what happens when the IPO, when they actually do one, because they did say they're going to do it. They didn't really say when, but they said it's, Mark said it was like likely to be doing it in 2019. If they were to do it, it would probably be like the end of 2019 or maybe the early 2020. Either way, they did say it's going to happen. So it's going to be very fascinating to see what happens when it finally does. So if you want to check out the keynote from Mark Shuttleworth's OpenStack Summit appearance, I guess you could call it, you can find a link to that in the show notes. In some more Canonical news, the egmde project has been announced, and this is a project that uses Mir. That's actually how they described it. What's really interesting is actually it's a desktop environment basically that uses Mir. Now it's not really like a full desktop environment. It's more of a example system. The initialism stands for the example Mir desktop environment. I'm not really sure where the G comes from, but anyway, it says that Mir provides a broad and powerful library to solve the many problems as far as like how the display server connects to the software and the applications and other libraries. But there's a learning curve to use Mir in an effective way as far as being the solution for that. So they created this like example desktop environment for Mir to teach people who are making other DEs how they could utilize Mir in their system. So if they wanted to support Wayland, but they didn't have an ability to build their own compositor for Wayland, which is basically, in order to support Wayland, every DE has to make their own compositor or to use a compositor that already exists. And Mir is one of those compositors that already exists and is going to be, usable for DEs to implement into their system. But they didn't really provide a way for people to see how it all works. And this is a new example that allows them to do that. So a developer of any particular DE could take this particular example and then engineer it or reverse engineer, I guess. But it's open source, so you don't have to reverse engineer it technically. But anyway, they could take that and put it into their own system or their own software to make sure it works on Wayland. So it's a really cool project that they're doing. And Ubuntu podcast, Martin from Ubuntu podcast, they talked about it in the last episode, and I thought it was funny because I want to talk about that. The way that it's egmde, and Martin likes to call it egg mode, and I think that that's the now unofficial name for this project, egg mode. I like it. If you'd like to learn more about this, you can find a link in the show notes. Up next in the show, Red Hat has announced the beta for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, which is the major version for the next release of RHEL. And this one is, there's kind of like pushing a lot more towards the cloud and container-based system. So they have a lot of cool things that are being added from Fedora. Like there's doing a lot of things for like DNF. They're replacing some pieces of the Yum package manager. They're being updated with the DNF package manager based on the DNF. So maybe in RHEL 9, they'll completely switch over to DNF, which would be nice because DNF is really good. So what's really cool in this latest version is that they are introducing something called application streams. And this is a concept that makes it easier to upgrade user space packages while leaving core operating system packages alone. This is one of the main things that Linux has had a problem with for years, having dependencies that you want to have one piece of software that wants a dependency of one version of this one of their dependencies, and another version of a different dependency. And you can't have both at the same time of those dependencies, and it was this weird, awkward situation. So there's been many different ways to mitigate it. This is a new one from Red Hat, and it's an application stream to do it more directly to the core system, which is really cool. And if you want the latest version of a program, you don't have to wait till the next release. You can just use the application stream and to say, I want this particular version of MariaDB, and this particular version of PHP, etc. And it can actually allow you to do, pick and choose what you want for whatever dependencies you want, as well as having multiple versions of a particular package. So if you needed 3 different versions of PHP, you could totally do it with this. So that's very, very cool. They've also said that they're going to utilize the kernel 4.18 upstream version, as well as using Fedora, a lot of stuff from Fedora 28, including GNOME 3.28 with Wayland as a default display server. So that's interesting for Red Hat to do that as far as the workstation part of it goes, because it's just interesting to use Wayland as default. I know that GNOME and Fedora use Wayland as default. I'm just kind of surprised that Rail decided to do as well. But anyway, that's great. Anyway, so it's kind of interesting because this is like the first release since IBM purchased it, or will be the first release because it's technically not out yet. But it's looking very close. A lot of people are going to be looking very closely at this release to kind of see what's going to happen with the future of Red Hat. And I think this is a good example of what's come. It's all the innovation that they're doing, because the application stream is a very cool idea. And I think this is it shows that it's clear that Red Hat is gearing up for like the hybrid cloud market approach. Actually the hybrid cloud market is a really cool idea. If you're not aware, it sounds like a keyword, like a buzzword, and it kind of is. But what the idea is that the hybrid cloud market is where you have a cloud service, but you have a hardware that is provided by a manufacturer, or you have your own hardware, and you have the stuff stored on your own in your own local area, or your own local area network, so your own section. Then it's also put into the cloud as like a backup, like back and forth. So like there's a local component, hardware component, and then there's a cloud component, where some services are just like doing the whole save everything to the cloud. The hybrid cloud idea is to do like both. You can have the local security of it, as well as like that the reliability of having the software local, or in the storage local, but also having stuff in the cloud too. So it's a very interesting approach, and that's probably the one I would choose if I were to do that kind of thing. But anyway, if you'd like to find out more about this particular release, or the beta release anyway, you can find a link to this in the show notes. We've got a lot more distro news in this episode, and up next is Void Linux. Void Linux is released 2018 11/11 release, so November 11th, 2018 release. This is a interesting thing that they're doing for this particular release. They've done a lot of security patches and things like that, but if you haven't heard of Void Linux, we talked about it in our previous episode about how they were having some issues with their maintainer being absent, and that's all been taken care of. So this is one of the reasons I want to put it into the show, to let you know that this has been taken care of. Void Linux is back to full capacity about making the making the project and everything. They have access to all the stuff except for the forum. They don't have access to the forum yet, which they could just make a new forum. I guess that's not a big deal. I guess. I mean, in my opinion, a forum as much as the people who use it, so you could just replace it. Anyway, so if you haven't heard of Void Linux is an independent distribution with actually it has even their package manager is written from scratch, called the XBPS, and they have a custom build system too. So it's really interesting because there's not that many distributions that are completely independent. They're usually like forked over Debian, or forked on Arch, or forked on Ubuntu, or something like that, and which is all fine. I have no problem with forks or anything, or derivatives. It's just like it's just interesting to see when new distributions come out with an independent approach, like Solus, like Void. There's many more, but it's really interesting to see those. And Void is a rolling release and has a ton of different flavors, like a ton. You can have a system that uses Enlightenment, Cinnamon, Mate, XFCE, LXDE, and LXQt. I did notice there's no Plasma there, so... but it also has support for a lot of ARM-based devices, like the BeagleBone, the QB board, the Odroid, and a bunch of Raspberry Pis, many different versions of the Raspberry Pi, and a bunch of other things. So it's really nice to see that they're back in full force, and I look forward to seeing what they do in the future. So if you want to check out the show notes, you can find a link for Void Linux there. Up next on the show is Slax 9.6.0 has been released. Slax is a minimal distro that uses the Fluxbox window manager by default. It's actually a really cool idea because they are doing a persistent system that runs on a USB. You can also install it if you want to. But what's really cool is that they have the option for a USB drive to be installed to it, but also have persistence there. And rather than just trying to do like a install from one USB to another, you can just install it directly to the USB like regular, and it have a persistent system built into it. It also has a modular system so that you can do all kinds of stuff with it. And what's interesting about it is that we talked about this distro a few I'm not sure how many episodes ago, but it was quite a few, and it was because they changed their base from Slackware to Debian. When they switched it over, there wasn't like a huge change. As far as, the core is a huge change, but I mean it's more like they were porting everything to it. And now this one has a lot of interesting, cool things that they're doing with it now. The persistence thing is really cool. And the minimalism of it is something I'm actually interested in trying out on one of my computers. Because they also support now, they fixed the Pixie boot or PXE boot, which allows you to boot a computer over a network. So you can have like a little bit of power going to the system. And then you can just tell from another computer on the network to say, boot this computer. And they fixed that, so that's pretty cool. But Slax is something I'm interested in because I have like an appliance thing. Like I have a stream. Well, I do one computer that has this. I do the show on, and then I'm going to try to do it where I do one show. Not a show. I don't know. I'm going to do some game streaming, for example, of having this one computer to play the game and then another computer do the streaming, because my main computer is not powerful enough to do both. You could do one or the other, but not both. And I have another computer that maybe could do the streaming. So the idea is that I would send the feed from one computer to the other and maybe use Slax as a minimal way of pushing that data to the internet. So I'll have to check that out and see if it'll work. But it has potential for it, because especially since it's so lightweight and things like that. So I'm looking forward to trying that out. Hopefully it might be a solution for it. And if it is, I'll let you know in a future episode whether it worked or not. Either way, if you want to find out more about Slax 9.6, you can find a link in the show notes. Up next in the show is deepin 15.8. 15.8 has been released from deepin, and there's quite a lot of cool things that have been done. Like deepin has some really nice interface changes that they have a nice sidebar effect for the settings, and they've done this a lot of work for the dock at the bottom, where you can do tray applets inside of the dock and stuff like that. It's overall they've done quite a good job for the polish of it. They've added a new grub theme so that you can have some nice splash effects when you boot your system, and also they've done some more efficiency. They call it an efficient mode, but it's not. I don't really say how it's efficient. It's just really more of an interface switcher. But they do have support where it will change the display based on the resolution. So it'll adapt to different monitors and different resolutions for it, as well as transparency settings and auto brightness controls. A lot of cool stuff like that. They've also made it where they did the Mac OS style, which is basically the applets. The tray applets being in there, as well as they also call it the Windows dock, which apparently is just basically turning the dock into a panel at the bottom. So I'm not sure when I call it a dock, but whatever. I guess that's really. It does kind of look like Windows it kind of looks like Windows 10 once you do it. It's really interesting as far as how close it is while at the same time being unique. But for the majority of the time, it's very Windows heavy. The application windows look very Windowsy, Microsoft Windowsy. But anyway, they've also added full disk encryption and stuff and a bunch of stuff. So for the installer, and if you want to check out more, you can find a video from the promo video for them. It's kind of weird because it's really long and it's the same repetitive music for the entire time. So you might want to just mute it when you watch it. But there you go. Just heads up for that. But deepin is making a lot of interesting stuff, and I do respect the work they put into the design. It's very nice. It's probably one of the nicest looking Linux distributions available. As far as like functionally, there's some things that I'm not really a fan of because it's kind of limited. This is more for people who like the polish and what they offer you and just use as is. I'm more of a customizer person, so I want to have some specific to my workflow, and deepin doesn't really offer that, so it's not really something I would be looking into. But it does have a lot of interesting benefits to it. It's very nice design, really. But there's also some controversy around deepin that's been going on for the past few months or so, related to some tracking. Like some people have called it spyware, some people have called it just tracking. It's not really either. Now, there are some issues where you could argue that they shouldn't have any kind of tracking whatsoever by default inside the system. In some cases, I would have to agree in the way that they did it, where it just automatically will be attached to the store, their app store. And the reason why that's a problem is because their app store automatically launches when you first boot the system. So that means when you first boot the system, you're automatically giving data to them. Oh, but not actually to them. But anyway, I'll get to that in a second. But it's more of because it's automatic is what makes the problem. But they basically they used to use this service called CNZZ, I think that's what it was. And it was essentially just like an analytics company. It's similar to Google Analytics, where you go to a website and they have Google Analytics at the bottom. That's, every time you load it, it's tracking what you're doing on their website so that they can make changes based on the experiences that the users have and things like that. So that's what these analytics tracking things are doing. The fact that they had it built into the store is kind of weird, even though the store was built on it as a web store. I mean, not really. It's an app store using web technologies like Electron to make it work. And it was kind of weird, but I don't think that tracking by default is necessarily bad. Like the way Ubuntu does it, I think that's fine, because they ask you if you would like to participate in the analytics, and you don't have to, but you can if you want to. And I think that's much better. They were just kind of doing it automatically, but at the same time, they weren't really tracking the user. So like there were some people talking about how some people misunderstood what was going on and saying that this particular ID meant it was the computer was sending it, but that ID was actually the account ID for deepin. So really, it's just deepin getting anonymous data. But at the same time, they're not really asking for permission to do that, so I can understand why that would be sketchy. But I did want to the reason I'm bringing this up is because I want to let you know that the deepin people made a blog post saying that they have removed the tracking part from the store so that doesn't happen anymore. They basically want to make sure that people are aware that if you do want to use deepin, they didn't have intent to do any kind of tracking thing like that. And it was like a misunderstanding between what they thought they were doing and what other people thought they were doing. And in order to, they decided to compromise in order to let everybody know that they're taking it completely out, so there wouldn't be any question about whether it's malicious or not. So there's that for you. And if you would like to check it out, I'll have a link in the show notes. Whonix 14 was released this week, and Whonix is it's a fun name. I like it. It's like a pun of who and Unix. I like it. Who's using it? It's not okay. Anyway, I like that. It's a fun name. Anyway, Whonix is a desktop operating system designed for advanced security and privacy. This is what they're stating it. Like that's what their point is. It also says that it mitigates the threat of common attack vectors while maintaining usability. What's interesting is that this is kind of like a distribution that is designed to be a virtual machine. So you run it inside of the virtual machine, and it uses the Tor network to be anonymous and private. So it's all built together for you. It's using a Debian-based system to do it all, but you essentially install this distro into a VM, use the Tor network, and then you can surf anonymously and basically do whatever you want through this to be more secure and more safe rather than your host machine, is what they're saying. Whether this is a necessary thing to do or not, I don't know. As far as you could just use a Tor network on your own computer or something like that, or use whatever distro you wanted inside of a VM, and that could kind of do it. But it is interesting to have a distro that's going to provide all of that together in one package and to make it easy to use. just so you can like load it up really quickly if you wanted to. So that's actually pretty cool, and I am going to consider looking into this because it is an interesting thing because of the whole VM specific approach they're doing, and I do want to check it out. And if you also would like to check it out, you can find a link in the show notes to Whonix. It's got to be that. It's got to be Whonix, right? Whonix 14. Up next in the show is some legal news from Mozilla, as they are now fighting for net neutrality. They have been for a very long time, really. This is more of an update. Basically, Mozilla said that if the FCC were to follow through on their removal of the net neutrality rules, that they will take them to court, and they have now done so in filing against the FCC to challenge them for their ruling on net neutrality, which is basically to abolish and completely remove and abandon net neutrality because they don't understand how the internet works or how ISPs work, apparently. Even though the guy who is the chairman of the SEC actually used to work for Verizon and totally should know how they work, but hey, there's that. So the problem is what Mozilla is stating is saying that the FCC's removal of net neutrality rules is not only bad for consumers, it is also unlawful. The protections in place were the product of years of deliberation and careful fact-finding that prove the need to protect consumers, who often have little or no choice of internet provider. Now, this is very, very true in many cases. Sometimes there's one option, and sometimes there's two options, but typically one option per technology. So you could say that sometimes the FCC would even say that this is actually like, oh, you have competition because the guy chairman from the FCC, he stated because you could go to DSL, and that's not the same thing. So you could have high-speed internet from cable, or you could have inferior internet from DSL. That's even a choice. Of course it's not. And in some cases, you don't even have that choice at all, and you have one option. Maybe you only have DSL. I mean, there's a lot of people who have that kind of situation, especially in like the rural areas and stuff like that. They're totally stuck unless they actually like physically move themselves to another place. And if you get fiber, well, there's actually competition with fiber for some reason. Like for some reason, the companies, when they have in the fiber areas, there's actually people trying to compete there because people want fiber. So they kind of have to compete because as soon as there's one company that does it, like Verizon Fios, and then Google joins in on that, and like Google Fiber, and then there's a Comcast Fiber and all this other stuff, then there's actually competition, and it's actually beneficial to consumers. It's somehow crazy that the FCC doesn't understand that. The only examples where there ever is competition, there's actually good options, and was when there is competition, but most of the time there isn't. For example, in my area, there was this one company that offered cable service inside the main city. And then there's another company that offered cable service for cable internet service around the city. So they didn't technically compete. They were more of like territorial-based competition where you didn't compete with each other at all. But anyway, then a couple years later, actually it's probably like last year, I think, the company who was outside the city decided to purchase outright the company inside the city. Now, of course, it wasn't because of my city that they did it for, but it's more of the fact that they were able to do so and then become an absolute monopoly in the area as far as that technology goes, cable internet. And yet somehow the FCC thinks that there's still competition. And like, not only is there not competition, they're not even pretending anymore that there is. So I'm glad that all these different people, like the Fight for the Future and the Save the Internet people, are working to make sure that these government officials and these government representatives are not just doing or getting away with doing whatever they can to benefit themselves and benefit their former employers and stuff like that at the sake of the users and the consumers. And the internet itself, because they're gonna try to mess it up as much as they can, because that's the status quo for ISPs apparently. So, moving on, they also go on to say that the FCC mischaracterizes the structure of the internet. Even they don't even understand how it works. They repeatedly contradict themselves and have even introduced new jurisdictions not outlined in the FCC's original decisions to repeal net neutrality protections. So it's really cool that they're working on filing against them to see if they can stop it, because hopefully they can, or hopefully like all the massive amount of people can stop it. FCC has already made the decision. This is more of like, can they get the legal system or Congress or whatever to do something about putting it back in place, because the FCC apparently doesn't know what they're doing. So, well, anyway, if you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to read the ridiculous 58 pages filing from Mozilla, I have a link to that and the blog post in the show notes. Up next in the show is the new Internet of Things security regulations from California. Now, we talked about this previously, but this is more like they've actually finalized what it's going to be in the document. So that's why I want to bring it back up. This is the SB 327 law, which will be taking into effect January 2020. It requires all connected devices to have a reasonable security feature. Now, the good news is that the term connected devices is very broadly defined. So this could include just about everything, even anything that connects to the internet at all. So that's kind of good. But the not so good news is that the reasonable security remains defined such that companies try to avoid compliance can argue that the law is unenforceable. The legislation requires that security features must be able to protect the device and the information on it from a variety of threats and be appropriate to both the nature of the device and the information it collects. So it's kind of too broad in that structure. So it's good to be broad about what is being affected, but not like what you're requiring them to do. So it's kind of like it still needs some work for it. But overall, it's really good that they're doing this, because Internet of Things, let's face it, security is not important at all to Internet of Things companies at all. Like security, updates, reliable usage. Really, they just want you to use their stuff and get the data and all kinds of things like that. They typically aren't focused on at all maintenance and anything, security maintenance, much less even regular, updating the software maintenance. Like a lot of IoT devices will be released and then never get an update ever. And that's not good. So it's really nice to see that there is some people taking some measures to try to mitigate that somehow, because apparently the manufacturers themselves don't care enough to provide security updates or even just updates in general. But some do, some don't. I mean, a lot don't, but some do. Like, well, that doesn't matter. I'm not going to promote products right now. Anyway, if you'd like to learn more about this bill, as well as you can check out the Schneider on security, his view of the bill itself, I'll have a link to that in the show notes. Up next in the show is some unfortunate news for WordPress plugin users. Well, specifically not just WordPress users, but people who use the WP GDPR compliance plugin. And this is a lot of people. So this is why I'm adding it to the show, because it's a significant one, and also it's probably going to get more attention because of the fact that it's a GDPR plugin, and a lot of people need something to help them, solve the GDPR issue. So this basically what this does, it helps this plugin helps websites be compliant with GDPR. I mean, not perfectly, because you still need to make sure that everything that you're doing is compliant. So you might have to talk to a lawyer or something like that, or a consultant of some kind. But this is more of a way to help mitigate it as fast as possible, as quickly as possible, and easy as possible. But anyway, so it's a very popular plugin, and that's the only reason I'm talking about it. And because it's a very, what it does is very, topical to, legal terms of security and stuff. So this plugin has over 100,000 active installs, and just around 3 weeks ago, attackers seem to have discovered a vulnerability in the plugin and began to use it to gain access to WordPress sites and also install backdoor scripts. So it would install scripts and change things basically to the whole thing. So the investigations were led by the WordPress security team specifically, because there was a bunch of people who were getting affected, and they went to WordPress and trying to figure out what was going on. And WordPress did a test to find out a bunch of different plugins were using the GDPR plugin as a part of theirs. So you might not have directly installed GDPR plugin itself, but other plugins would like ask you to install it automatically and then they would get installed. But so they found the problem and they contacted the people who made the plugin, and it has been fixed. So 1.4.3 has the version that has this patch that mitigates this vulnerability. So if you are using this plugin in your WordPress system, you should absolutely update it, because if you don't, they're saying that attackers are targeting this bug because it allows them to make a call to one of the plugin's internal functions and change the settings for both the plugin and also for the entire WordPress install. So that could be very bad. So if you do use this plugin, you should absolutely update immediately. And you'll find a link to the update as well as this forum post to let everybody know that they need to update in the show notes. Up next in the show is some very bad security situation with Instagram. Unfortunately, when there was an issue with when you wanted to export your data or like download your data from their servers, they had a bug where they would send your password in plain text. So anybody who had a metadata could take your data, or any kind of, if you do it on a public network, all kinds of stuff. So anyway, according to the information.com, that's an interesting website. Unfortunately, it's a paywall system, but whatever. I'll have a link to both the information website and a link to another one like Engadget where it gives you more details, because the paywall thing. Anyway, so Instagram has suffered a serious security leak of its pretty bad, of exposing user passwords. The Instagram issue is linked to its tool that allows users to download a copy of the data. And I kind of already said that, but it's more of a it's necessary. Like, they fixed it now, but what's funny about it is, well, it's not funny because it's bad that people who are affected by it, but it is funny because Instagram is owned by Facebook, and Facebook has the motto of move fast, break things, and more the news about Facebook and about Instagram is them breaking things and moving too fast, and I think that's kind of funny. So, they're living up to the motto very well, and that's a very bad motto. Just so you know, don't do that. Move fast without breaking things. That's a better motto. Move as fast as you can without creating breaks. There you go. You should try that, because right now, this is not working for you. I mean, technically speaking, money-wise, it is kind of working for them because they're, selling people's data and stuff. But moving on, if you're using Instagram, be sure to make sure you should probably, just in case, change password. You probably don't need to, because if you didn't download the data, it probably isn't affected anyway. But you still should just consider it, because it's if you are worried about losing your password and stuff, you should get a password manager like Bitwarden, because Bitwarden is free, open source, and great. And they actually recently did a security audit that they found a bunch of bugs. None of them huge bugs. They were all ones they needed to be solved, and they have solved them. But there was no like big catastrophic thing, which is great. It's always good to see that they're doing it properly. So I like that. And if you subscribe to the channel or to the show, I'm also going to be talking about Bitwarden in a future video as soon as I'm not sick. So be sure to subscribe. And if you want to find more about this particular bug from Instagram, you can find a link in the show notes. And finally, the show this week is the Linux gaming sales that are going on in like the autumn fall type sales. And first off, we have Steam. They have a sale. Humble Bundle has a sale in the Humble Store, as well as the Jumbo 12. And there's also the Fanatical sale and the GOG sale, the GOG.com, or as it used to be called, Good Old Games. There's also like just tons of different things, but I want to go ahead and before we get talk about the games that are on sale that are really good deals, I wanted to first let you know that the affiliate links are for Humble Bundle and Fanatical, So if you get the Fanatical sale, or you go to the Humble store or the Humble bundle for the Jumbo, those are all affiliate links. So a percentage will be a commission for This Week in Linux and TuxDigital. But there's no affiliate for GOG or Steam. So if you'd like to, this is just a possibility. I'm not saying I'm suggesting it. I'm just saying this. If you'd like to, if you wanted to check out whether a game you wanted to buy on Steam was also available in the Humble store, which you could then get a Steam key from the Humble store, just there's some options there. I'm just saying. Like Rocket League is the same price on both. I'm just saying. Anyway, continuing. So there's a lot of games that are going on right now, and that are discounted. A lot of awesome games that are being discounted. So you can get Ballistic Overkill, which is a game that I play a lot of, as well as the Destination Linux crew. We play the Ballistic Overkill a lot, and we play with the community and stuff. So if you'd like to buy it now and join in that game, you can, because it's only like $6. I think it's a little bit less, but basically $6. And Rocket League, which I love. I play that all the time. And that's $10 right now, so it's 50% off for the normal price. There's also Gummy's Life, which we talked about on Destination Linux a couple episodes ago. It's really a weird, adorable, and hilariously awesome. And the idea is a fighting battle game, like a arena type battle fighting game, using candy, basically gummy bears, essentially fighting each other. It's really silly, but I like the idea of it. You can also get a huge discount for Borderlands series. So if you're interested in ever looking at the Borderlands series, Borderlands 1 is not available in Linux, but Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel and all the DLCs and stuff are all available in Linux natively. And they're currently having a discount where you can get basically every Borderlands game and every DLC and all that stuff for $15. So that's like $200 saving basically from the retail price of the games and stuff. So that's a pretty good deal. And Borderlands 2 is amazing. Borderlands pre-sequel is still good, but not as good as 2. 2 is fantastic. But also there's Rise of the Tomb Raider is currently on sale for only $12, which is a pretty significant discount. And you can also get Valve's Portal 1 and Portal 2 for $3 each. Wait, no, sorry. You can get Portal 1 and Portal 2 for $3, period. But you can get Trine 1 and Trine 2, which are platformers that I really like. You can get those for each $3. So lots of games, tons of games that are really, like Dirt Rally's also on big discount for I'm pretty sure from Humble Store. Tons of games to check out. If you would like to, you can find a link in the show notes for all these different platforms, as well as you can go to tuxdigital.com/games on sale, which will have links to the front page of each of these stores. So it's actually better than that, really. They're not from the front page. I'm sorry. There is a front. Okay, there is, but there's also these sections or these sale. These games on sale, and there's a link to the search section, the sales search for Linux on all these platforms. And the reason I did that is because most of these platforms have this weird thing where you have to go to a certain section on the search, then choose which platform you want, then choose you want to get games on discount and all this other stuff. So those links are just direct links to those things, so to those platforms with those variables already applied. So for example, if you wanted to go see all the Linux games that are available on Steam and on sale, you can go to tuxdigital.com/Steam sale, and etc. There's Fanatical sale, Humble sale, etc. You can find them all at tuxdigital.com/games on sale, and also in the show notes for this episode and in the video description on YouTube. So, yep, lots of games, and I'm probably going to pick up at least a few. So, if you would like to, let me know what you're going to pick up as well, and we can in the comments below, and maybe we could play if you get the same games I get. By the way, I'm going to get Gummy's Life because I think that's going to be hilariously fun to play ridiculous gummy battle. I don't know. It's hard to describe. It's weird. Just check it out. Gummy's Life and all the sales for Steam and Humble and Fanatical and all that stuff in the show notes. Finally in the show this week is some news for SuperTuxKart and SuperTux. And if you haven't heard, there's a lot of cool games that are available that don't require Steam, and also use the Tux Penguin as a character in the game. These are actually pretty old games. They've been around for a very long time, and they're quite fun. But the SuperTuxKart is doing something that I've been wanting for a very, very long time, and that is they are now going to offer online play so you can race other people. Fantastic. Been waiting for this for a very long time. Awesome. It's not technically ready right now. However, there are some tests. They are looking for testers to help them, correct and perfect the issues of bugs or anything that happens with playing online. So they're asking for people to test out the new branch to see if there's any bugs so they can fix them. Now, the issue is that if you like to test, they don't provide any binaries to actually test. This is more of you have to compile the testing branch yourself in order to help out, because they want people who are able to compile so they can do log testing, and so they can send the logs based on when you compile it, if there's an issue and stuff like that. So there's that kind of thing. So if you're inclined to help there, that'd be great, because SuperTuxKart is actually they're making a lot of new things. They even made a whole new rendering engine and physics engine and stuff like that. So I'm really excited that they're making so much progress, because it's a fun game, and I like the fact that it has all these different mascots from various different projects as racers. It's great. There's also a community that builds their own custom maps and custom racers and all kinds of stuff, so that's cool too. But the only thing that's missing from that game that I really, really want is online play, and they're now working on it, and it's getting close. So I'm excited for that. The other game is SuperTux, which is a clone essentially of Super Mario back in the day. It's a platformer, and it has a bunch of the same style, the same kind of functionality of gameplay, but in a Linux type Tux style kind of thing. But what's really cool about it is they're making a whole big update, and they've recently released a new alpha. Now, it is an alpha, so it's going to have some bugs and it's going to have some issues. So if you would like to test it, you can feel free to do so. But instead of the way SuperTuxKart's doing it, SuperTux is doing it where they're offering an app image. So you just download the app images, set it to executable, and then play the game. So if you want to test it that way, it's a really easy way to try out and test out the new version if you'd like to, without having to worry about having dependencies and all this other stuff for it. So that's really cool, and I'm glad to see games utilizing these universal formats like that, because it makes it a lot easier to play the games. And for the most part, games are one of those examples where the dependencies coming with the package is kind of like the normal. And for example, Xonotic, you would download this zip or as tarball, and everything would be included in there, and you would just launch a file inside the folder. And if they were to just release it as an app image, it essentially would do the same thing. So it's really cool to see that some games are doing that with app images. So if you would like to check it out, you can find a link to both the SuperTuxKart blog post as well as the Gaming on Linux article about SuperTux in the show notes. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on the show, please like that smash button and be sure to subscribe. If you'd like to support the TuxDigital channel, we have multiple ways to contribute via PayPal, Patreon, and many more. You can learn more by going to tuxdigital.com/contribute. Or you can order the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt by going to tuxdigital.com/Linux is Everywhere. Or if you're in Europe, you can go to tuxdigital.com/Linux is Everywhere EU for shipping inside of Europe. We also have ways to contribute without any cost to you by using our affiliate links. You can find links for places like Amazon, private internet access, and many more by going to tuxdigital.com/affiliates. If you'd like to submit some news to the show, then you can do that at our subreddit by going to thisweekinlinux.reddit.com. If you'd like some more podcasting goodness from me, then check out the latest episode of Destination Linux, as I'm a co-host of that show. And just a reminder, this show is live every Saturday, usually. So join us in the live chat room to discuss all the latest Linux news each week. Thanks again for watching. I'm Michael Tunnell with TuxDigital, and as always, keep using, learning, and enjoying Linux.